Hello, and welcome to Seed World Strategy webinar. Today, we're going to dig into roots and the need to protect them. My name is Julie Deering. I serve as the editor of Seed World, and today I'll be serving as your moderator. First, I'd like to take a moment to thank our sponsors, BASF, Bayer, and Syngenta. A few housekeeping items to note: this webinar is being recorded and will be made available on seedworld.com following the event. As we go along, if you have any questions or comments, please type them into the chat box and I'll make note of them. Today, we're going to be hearing from Steve Bergschneider of BASF, Amy Burton of Bayer, and Dale Ireland of Syngenta. And we're going to discuss, go through the market overview of seed treatments, the importance of roots and their role, and how seed treatments impact root growth. Then we'll come together for a short roundtable discussion and a question and answer session to wrap things up, and that's when you'll have the chance to ask questions. So with that, I'm going to go ahead and introduce our first speaker for today, Steve Bergschneider. Steve serves as the Senior Marketing Manager for Seed Enhancement at BASF. In this role, he oversees marketing for inoculants, seed enhancements, and seed biotics. Steve is also responsible for building the seed treatment business within BASF. Prior to his role here at BASF, he served as the Regional Sales Manager for Becker Underwood, and he earned his bachelor's from the University of Illinois and today lives in Raleigh, North Carolina. Steve, the floor is yours.
All right. Thank you, Julie. Again, as she stated, my name is Steve Bergschneider, here with BASF. And in part of the setup that we were doing today, one of the areas that we had from a topic was really a seed treatment overview. And when I was looking at the seed treatment overview, from not fully knowing exact whereabouts of everybody that's participating in the call today, and knowing that there are several different crops and inputs that you would be looking at, instead of breaking down a dollar amount and looking at individual types of crops for an overview, I kind of looked at it from a different strategy and kind of brought in how we look at it here from BASF. So when you look at the seed treatment overview, what I'm going to talk about is more about the segments of the market and their effects. Some of them more directly on trying to tie it back to the root development and the plants, which is the overall theme of our message and conversation today. But talk about just each one of the segments a little bit in general. So with that, I think we'll get started. We're going to start with some general comments about seed treating. We'll move into a little bit on rhizobia and some specific product that we work with here at BASF. I'll tie that into biologicals in general and how they are affecting and why people are looking at biologicals more so nowadays in that segment. Touch a little bit on active ingredient or active chemical AIs that in the marketplace, and again why. Looking at it from an overview perspective, and then just one brief slide towards the end, pulling it all together and keeping it close to the seed with the functional coatings. So with that, I'd like to kick off. So late last year in 15, which really helped set the tone for a lot of the things we were doing in 16 and we'll be going with forward. Obviously all companies are doing surveys asking for insights and impacts that come from our growers. And one of the areas that we looked at with corn and soybean growers in the Midwest was their thoughts and what they're thinking about seed treatments and how the inputs affect their decision making or affected. So there's four different slides. There's four different slides on this presentation, and if you look, you can see really from a popularity of seed treatments. Even though we were starting into a bit of a difficult time from a crop commodity price perspective, if you look at that from a popularity of seed treatments and soybean growers specifically, if you looked at 93% of the growers surveyed are using seed treatments and or inoculants in their acres in 15. When you talk to them about their future endeavors and what they're going to be doing with seed treatments and such, they looked at 87% are indicating they're still open and to using seed treatments in the future. And I think that's pretty important when we look at this side of the industry. This is kind of very important to establishing roots and such. And so it's good to see that we have an area of the market that is somewhat fairly stable, and people are still looking for opportunities to protect plants. Increasing awareness of seed treatments. The 83% of growers but they're unsure of what brands and active ingredients make up their seed treatments. So we're wanting to additionally have an opportunity to educate and talk about all the opportunities that can happen below ground and in root development with their seed treatments, and then help them understand that better via more learnings and such, and learning so that they know how to calculate and look at the return on investment, risk mitigations, and environmental conditions where seed treatments become important. So the first area that I really want to touch on a little bit is around rhizobia inoculants for the legume crops. And although there's not as much enhancement to root development, really when we look at these, they're still very important to a large segment of the crops that are grown, be it in the U.S., in the markets that we work. But we essentially have a symbiotic relationship between the legumes and the legume plants and the rhizobia. It allows the seed applied inoculants, support nitrogen fixation, which is a good thing. Rhizobia cells colonize the root hairs. Nodules begin to form within a couple weeks of the plants germinating, and due to that, nitrogen is fixed by the plant and used to synthesize amino acids and proteins. Again, this goes to the establishment and the health of the overall legume crops and development therein of the overall yield and return that the customer or the grower would be receiving. One of the ways that we go about doing this is through a product that we call Vault HP. And one reason I wanted to kind of bring it up again, this is kind of a bridge to some points that I'd like to visit about on biologicals as a perspective and a segment of the market. But when you look at some of the things that are going on, these are the types of options that customers have. When you look at that, Vault HP plus Integral, you've got a rhizobia-based product. It's the brown bladder in the picture on the right, and you have extender food base, and then you have in the Integral biofungicide a biological. But it's a product that is a premium product in the marketplace. Low application rates, outstanding on-seed survival for flexibility around planting time for growers, upwards of 120 days with many of the active seed treatment products that are out there, and formulations that allow it to treat better through commercial seed treaters. So when we start looking at these types of products, biologicals are becoming a bigger additional. Now, obviously, rhizobia are living, breathing organisms, but when we move into additional biologicals that start to touch other crops, the rhizobia wouldn't as much be involved. But when you look at that, when you look at biologicals as an overall segment in the seed treatment and what they can do and where they can come into root development, that really they're there for enhanced disease protection, whether it be for the spectrum of control or the length of control. Biologicals add to the active ingredient chemical products, seed treatment products, and add length of protection. Here at BASF, we're increasing plant vigor, drought tolerance, plant health, and nutrient uptake because of the improvements in the rooting structure with the biological components and products that we currently have on the market and will be bringing. We extend, consistency and efficacy of the actives, and really very important when you look at biologicals as a segment of the seed treatment business. We need to make sure that they work with all the products that are either going on the seed or in and around the seed sphere, the area around the seed, to make sure that we're not harming the biological products. They can definitely be damaged and not support the plant in the manner that we had planned when we put them on the seed if we're not making sure they mix properly and are consistent with the products that we're using. When you look at some of the things that we've been able to do, and this is one thing that we're doing, this is the Integral, which is the biofungicide that is in the Vault HP. But it's kind of a unique picture, and I'll kind of walk you through. So really what they've done and how this is how it's protecting the root zone, the roots under the ground. So the seeds were grown for 7 days in the artificial soil. So in the auger, you can see in the test tubes on the far left of the slide pictures. The roots then were detached and placed on an agar plate so they could visualize the bacteria location. So the bacteria, so if you look at the root taken off, put on the agar plate in the middle, and then of course we have the close-up of the picture on the right. And as you can see, because of the way the Integral colonizes around the roots, it moves and grows with the root development. So this allows for a healthy, protected root. You can see in the kind of the shadow, the white around the root hairs sticking out, the small roots, where it's sticking to the roots and providing kind of a niche exclusion or protection from any substances, other diseases from infecting the root hairs, infecting the main stem of the plant root. So that's definitely a close-up picture kind of showing exactly what the biologicals can do, how some of them work, and really what they would look like below ground that we can't necessarily see from above. In the next slide, if you look, again, this is the integral, this is the Bacillus subtilis. Again, it's a registered product that's targeted around suppression of Rhizoctonia and Fusarium. The spores rapidly germinate and colonize in the rhizoplane, which is exactly kind of what we were showing on the last slide, and help allow for added protection, produces antifungal metabolites, and increases the fungicidal activity. These can be applied, whether they're applied on seed or in furrow around the, like I said, around the seed area, whether it's an in-furrow application. This is the type of results and the types of benefits that we're seeing from a biological segment of the products. These are the things that we're shooting for here. You can see the soybean plants untreated. These were a Rhizoctonia challenge trial, so it means the soil was infected artificially with Rhizoctonia, and so we ramped up the pressure. But you can definitely see the activity of the biological alone in protecting the roots and allowing for bigger, healthier root development, in turn, bigger, healthier plants above ground. From another segment from the business is the chemical AI overview. So if we look at that, the chemical AIs are offering disease protection during the germination period. They're promoting more uniform germination and stand establishment, supporting of early plant development. They are giving the genetics that their customers or growers are choosing the best opportunity to achieve the yield potential that's in the bag when they purchase it. Better stress tolerances at early stages due to healthier root systems being established, and again, also allowing farmers the opportunity to plant when field conditions allow, maybe not necessarily when the calendar says it's right, but when field conditions allow and when they feel they must go. And this can be really delivered through an on-seed application or an in-furrow type of application. When you look at the slide that we have here, here's a few examples of a combination of active ingredient and biological in corn. You can see from the top left picture the root development on the 3 plants on the right side of the picture that had the active ingredient products, and then had the integral biofungicide added to it and put in the seed zones. You can see that. You can get a little closer, look at the pictures or the plants on the left. In the bottom left, as they developed a little further, you can see a little healthier, larger stalk, but you can see a larger root mass on the bottom, again leading to better plants overall in the root development. And then you can see a little bit later on where you're starting to see the growth of the plant due to all the benefits of the root development below the ground, healthier plant, taller plant, and a better established plant. So to kind of wrap up my segment kind of from an overview and the various segments of the seed treatment business and ways that we can promote establishing better root and root health, is looking at the functional coatings type of business, the polymers that we use to help growers plant, but more importantly, it keeps all of the chemicals, whether it be biologicals, active ingredients, nematicides, all the components on the seed, and make sure that the farmer is getting what he's expecting and what he's paying for in the bag. So these are a unique way to give him an added layer of protection and knowing that the chemical and the products he's purchasing are on the seed. So with that, I will turn it back to Julie. Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. I appreciate that. Now we're going to transition over to Amy, and Amy's going to talk more about the roots and the important role that roots play. Amy is a plant physiologist and team lead for Bayer. She has been working in the area of herbicide tolerance and has more recently been studying seed treatments and their impact and interaction with roots. And Amy studied at Penn State University as well as the University of Georgia. So, Amy, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Julie. Good afternoon, everyone, or I guess I should say good morning to those of you who are on the West Coast. I'm very glad to be part of the webinar today, and I'm pleased to share some research on Bayer's seed treatment Poncho Votivo. Today I'm going to talk about how Poncho Votivo changes the structure of the root and helps promote new root growth. So Poncho Votivo has two components. First, we have the Votivo component, which is a biological that creates a living barrier over the root and protects against nematodes. And then we have the Poncho component, which is a systemic insecticide, and that offers protection on a variety of early season pests. So Poncho Votivo has been on the market for 6 years, and during that time, on average, we've seen a very consistent yield gain of 10 bushels per acre with this product. So when we grow plants treated with Poncho Votivo out in the field, we see a real difference between those plants and untreated plants. Poncho Votivo really gives plants the start they need to go on to better performance and improved yield. And we're really proud of that at Bayer. We're a life science company, so we always want to know more about the science behind our products. And in particular, when we're talking about biological seed treatments, we're really interested in better understanding how those seed treatments support root health. So what we wanted to do was to take a closer look below ground, just to look at the root structure. So what you're seeing here are root segments from 4-week-old corn seedlings. On top we have untreated plants, a couple of different root classes. We've got the nodal root and the primary root, and then same root classes down on the bottom. But we have root segments from plants that have been treated with Votivo. So what we were trying to visualize on these root segments was we wanted to really look closely at the living barrier. But in looking at these root segments really closely, we noticed something kind of unexpected. In plants that were treated with Votivo, we saw these air spaces, and we saw that really consistently from one plant to another, from one sample to another, and one genotype to another. So one of the really great things about a strong R&D pipeline is you are able to pursue some of these unexpected things that you find in your research, and we reserve time for innovation. So we can get that added value for our customers. These air spaces are called parenchyma, and they form after programmed cell death, and that's just a way of saying the plant can get rid of cells that it doesn't need anymore. So this is something that is a normal part of development in grasses like corn. So this is something that happens naturally, but it's actually amplified during stress. So one thing researchers have noticed is that corn plants with parenchyma are able to survive stresses better than those without. But what's really interesting about this is corn plants form parenchyma in response to a wide variety of soil stresses. Plants form parenchyma in response to flooding, but also to drought and a variety of other nutrient deficiencies. Even though these stresses are really different from one another, corn plants can respond in the same way by forming parenchyma. What we learned from that is seeing that this is a generalized stress response in corn, and that's a really good thing because it indicates that seed treatments could potentially be useful in fighting soil stresses. And that's something that we're all interested in. So what are some of the benefits of parenchyma? First, the plant has fewer cells to maintain. And that's a good thing because maintaining tissues actually costs the plant energy. And secondly, the plant can recycle the materials from dead cells and turn them into new roots. So that's kind of a cool thing that the plant's able to do, is to be able to use the raw materials to grow new roots. This is not theoretical. Academic researchers have actually shown this in the field. So basically, existing roots are hollowed out to grow new roots into untapped areas of the soil. It's pretty efficient. So when we quantify parenchyma, we're able to see that Poncho Votivo induces a 10% gain in parenchyma compared to control plants. So as parenchyma plants grow new roots with recycled materials, they increase their soil exploration, and that's something that has a direct and positive impact on plant performance. So why is that? Because it puts the plant in direct contact with pockets of nutrients and water that it wouldn't otherwise have been able to access. I'm going to show you a computer model that will show you the difference in root growth over time between a plant that has a lot of parenchyma. You'll see that on the left side, and then on the right side, or on the left side you'll see a plant without parenchyma, on the right side you'll see a plant that has parenchyma. So what you see is that both plants start out similarly, and as parenchyma forms on the right side, we start to see a difference between these two plants. So we see new axial roots that are expanded out into the soil. We see changes in lateral rooting. So we see longer lateral roots and more dense lateral roots. And the lateral roots are going to be really important because they're used by the plant to directly access water and nutrients in the soil. But anyway, you can look at the final screenshot here and you can really see, there we go, thanks. So you can see the plants really starting to diverge about now, where we see axial roots coming out into the soil, and then kind of a burst of lateral roots. What I've shared with you today is that Concha votiva changes the structure of corn roots by enhancing the amount of parenchyma or air spaces inside the root. And what plants are doing basically is trading living cells that they have to maintain in exchange for air. So that saves energy and allows the plants to grow new roots out into the soil. And we know from literature in this area that plants with more parenchyma are able to perform better and they have yield gains over plants without parenchyma. And with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Julie.
So Amy has captured kind of how seed treatments have the ability to impact roots and the important role that roots play. And now we're going to hear from Dale, and Dale is going to build on that and talk about what happens when the seed hits the ground. Dale works for Syngenta Crop Protection as the technical product lead of seed care for U.S. corn and soybeans. He plays an instrumental role in profiling active ingredients for disease, insect, and nematode protection. His skill set stems from his previous experience and roles working as a crop consultant as well as in agronomy and research, and he's held positions at DuPont Pioneer, Monsanto, as well as Dobler Hybrids, and Dale studied at Texas A&M University as well as Iowa State University. Dale, take it away.
Thank you very much, Julie. Good day to everyone that's on the phone. We appreciate your time joining us for this webinar. So if everything's working properly technologically, you're seeing a picture of an iceberg. Now, why would I be showing you a picture of an iceberg? Well, first of all, to get your attention, the idea of using an iceberg in my own thought was what's out of sight really does matter, especially when it comes to plants and their root system. And as we were discussing areas to cover this morning as far as the value of seed treatments in developing root systems, I just thought that an iceberg was a nice analogy with the importance of what happens out of sight. So we know that approximately 2/3 of the mass of an iceberg is out of sight, but we also know it's a very critical portion if you're mobile around an iceberg, that you need to make sure that even though it is out of sight, you do need to keep it in your mind. Now, several years ago, Syngenta committed itself to developing healthier roots with better seed treatments, and really committed ourselves to the idea of rooting power. If we stop and think about kind of what we're doing with seeds, starting off with a seed treatment, what we're really trying to do is maximize the genetic potential of that seed. We've got entire breeding programs that develop great hybrids and varieties, and seed treatments are trying to help protect as much of that genetic potential as possible. Now, when you think about seeds in a unit of seed, whether it's one of the big bulk units or possibly just the bag of seed, it really has its greatest genetic potential while it's still in the bag. And we're trying to protect it with seed treatments early in its life, the seed and the seedling, against both biotic and abiotic stresses. So we're talking about diseases, we're talking about insect pests, nematodes, as well as different stresses that attack that are not biotic, things like weather and different moisture and lack of moisture types of stresses also. So seed treatments protect that developing seed and seedling. So what's the root system for? Essentially, the root system is certainly for anchoring the plant in the earth or in the soil. It's also there to gather as much moisture and nutrients for that plant as it develops. Now, to be a good seed treatment, it first of all must be efficacious. It must have an effect on whether it's protecting against disease like a fungicide does, or have an impact on insects as an insecticide does, or actually impact and kill or at least dissuade nematode feeding on the root. So those are all things that you have to have. You have to have an effect. And certainly there's a whole new biological class of products that are doing many of these same things, as well as extending the root system and increasing its efficiency. But what I'm focusing on here is that if you don't protect that root system against all the different stresses or stressors that are coming in and trying to limit that root growth early, because we normally think of a root or a seed treatment being efficacious for somewhere in the neighborhood of 20 to 30 days, depending on the AI, depending on the seed treatment loading. There are some, like Chlorella, that would have a season-long effect, but in general, we think of chemistries as having a more limited early development. But we're trying to make sure that that young seedling grows off evenly, it grows off robustly, it comes out of the ground quickly under a variable number of conditions, and that we have a good stand that's uniform as it emerges. Syngenta uses many tools to develop seed treatments, and we use things like growth chambers, greenhouses, field trials as an active ingredient is being developed. But one thing that we've really been enjoying using recently have been rhizotrons, and that's what's on the slide right here. In this set of pictures here to the left, you basically see 5 seeds that were planted in each one of these rhizotrons. The one on the left is a Syngenta seed treatment, one of our leading seed treatments for soybean. The one on the right here is one of our leading competitors, also has 5 seeds planted. And you'll see some differences here. And the pictures here on the right, where my cursor is now, as well as here, are just magnified images of those on the left. Now, oftentimes it's difficult to communicate the differences that seed treatments have when you're just talking about them. What we've found is having live plants, like at a farm progress show, or at a grower meeting, or at a dealer training session, or a field day, is a very valuable way to show the differences there are in seed treatments. Now, today's webinar is not particularly about marketing and trying to drive a particular brand necessarily, but what I do want to, as a scientist, show you here today is that the product on the left and the product on the right are 2 entirely different seed treatments. Now, a lot of times folks say, well, I've got treated seed. My seed is no longer just naked seed, that doesn't have a seed, that doesn't have a coloring or a dye on it. It's obviously treated. It's showing a color on it, so I've got treated seed. And yet they really don't differentiate what the different active ingredients are in a seed treatment. Interestingly enough, the seed treatment on the left has 6 different active ingredients, and the seed treatment on the right also has 6 active ingredients. Now, this soil has been infected with Rhizoctonia solani, a common top 3 soil disease that attacks seed and seedlings in both corn and soy. In this case, we're using soybean as an example, but certainly Rhizoctonia is very, very common throughout the agricultural soils of the United States and Canada, and Mexico for that matter. But what we're showing here are, although there are differences in seed treatments, each one of these seed treatments has 6 different AIs, and not one molecule is the same in the Syngenta leading premium seed treatment here that's shown here as this. There's not one molecule that's the same. So they each have 6 different AIs, active ingredients, but each one has 6 entirely different ones. So the idea that, a seed treatment's a seed treatment is really something that we need to stop and kind of challenge and think about. And I would even suggest that the one on the right, the leading competitor, this particular treatment, is even about 25 to 30% more expensive than the one on the left. So what I would challenge you to do if you're a retailer, if you're a seed purveyor, if you're a grower, is to ask people who are sourcing your seed treatment, what is in it, what are the strengths, what are the challenges that these products have, because they're not all created equal. Now let's look at some of the different things that we see here in these Rhizotron pictures. And because I can't actually ask you particular questions and get responses right now, I'm going to just ask some open-ended questions and then go through some of the things that I see here. So what about uniformity of growth above ground? I mean, Rhizotrons allow you to see both above and below ground very nicely, and that's what this tool is really used for very, very easily. I mean, we see a very uniform, a very robust seedling here, these soybean plants. You see the leaf area of each one of these plants is quite nice. It's very uniform. We know that as a plant physiologist, we know that as plants grow out in the field and they emerge very uniformly, they come up quickly, they grow off well, there's no hesitation, there's no stunting or any type of phytotoxicity. We know that these plants are exhibiting the most potential to yield the most in the future. Anytime you slow down early development of a seedling, whether it's corn, soy, whatever crop it is, it's not a positive thing. It's a negative thing. And we know that limiting early root growth is also can be very negative, especially. Because when you take a plant and you have it growing and you have developing root system, and whether it's nematodes, whether it's disease, whether it's insect pests that are impacting root growth, what happens is once it begins entering the reproductive stage, oftentimes the loss of root growth and development early is never gained back. Once the plant redirects its efforts toward flowering, towards filling the crop, the seeds that are developing. And then when you have stressful periods, as we oftentimes do, if you don't have a good root system to anchor and to gather moisture and nutrients, you can very much limit the potential that you have. So when I look at below ground, when I see the amount of rooting depth, the amount of horizontal rooting here that we have, the axial and lateral rooting that we have, these types of root area, when you look at the treatment on the left compared to the treatment on the right, you see a great deal of difference in root area. That just means that you have limited amount of root system that's going to be uptaking moisture and nutrients. So what I want to do is just reinforce that what's out of sight should not be out of mind. But I also would like to reinforce is that not all seed treatments are created equal. When you increase the root health, what happens is you're able to explore a larger soil volume. And when you explore a larger soil volume, you're able to improve the potential of reaching the genetic yield that seed and seedling offer. And when you protect that and you're able to have more root area to explore greater volume of soil for moisture and nutrients, you then increase the chances and increase of those genetics that you've purchased. So really in a nutshell, that's what these different seed treatments that we've talked about, that's the importance of root health. So I just want to thank you for your time this afternoon from Syngenta's point of view, and thank you for your business, and then turn it back over to Julie and my colleagues. I think there's going to be a Q&A time period. So thank you very much.
Great. Thank you, Dale. I appreciate that. So as you'll see or note, what we've tried to do here is to really hone in on the importance of roots, the role that they play, and why we need to protect those roots. and how seed treatments play into that, and the seed treatment market. And so what I'd like to do now is go ahead and move into our speaker roundtable, and I've got some questions here for our speakers that I'd like to kick things off, and then we'll move into our audience Q&A as well. So again, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat box, and I'll make note of them here in a couple minutes. So first, Steve, and I think we'll get started with you. Why are we now seeing this latest wave of research and investment and focus on roots? So we've got the Soil Health Partnership, and some pretty significant contributions have recently been made there, both from nonprofit organizations as well as companies. So we're seeing a renewed focus on soil health and then roots, so kind of that underground component.
Well, I thank you for that question. Really, when you look at it, it's a plant is very similar to foundation of a building or your home, and you don't build anything that's substantial or strong without having a great foundation. As some of the other speakers commented today, it all starts, underground with health there. The plants won't get the proper nutrients they have or need for the yields that are expecting from customers nowadays if there's not a proper established root system underneath. And so the emphasis is really starting out there to start the season correctly. And again, like I said, really hope to obtain the maximum potential that the genetics have in them when they plant in the ground. So we really need to start with a great foundation, and I think that's why a great deal of emphasis is there. It sets the plants up in opportunities later on in the season to deal with certain situations, whether it be moisture, heat, any of the types of stresses that can affect it. So
the question was, why are we now seeing this wave of investment and focus on roots? I think roots are notoriously difficult to study. And it's hard to watch them actively growing, with the exception of something like a rhizotron. It's hard to see them actively growing in their natural habitat. And when we dig them up, we lose a lot of information about the way that the roots were interacting with their environment. And, not to mention the fact that root work is really messy and tedious. So I think for these reasons, roots really haven't been given their proper attention in ag research. And for decades, I think we've been able to not pay as much attention to the roots because we've been able to get yield and performance gains through, changes in agronomy and breeding of shoot traits. But I think we've arrived at a point where we can't afford to ignore the root system any longer. The root system is often called the hidden half, and we're not going to feed 10 billion people by ignoring the foundational part of the plant, as Steve pointed out.
So this is Dale Ireland. Just looking at some of these questions, can I comment on pros and cons of in-furrow versus seed treatment? I think one of the biggest challenges with in-furrow is the additional plumbing that's required. Folks like to have something that's actually right on the seed. There are different applications that can go in-furrow, and that's fine. But one of the conveniences is that you have your fungicides, insecticides, nematicides right on the seed, and it's very convenient. You can just go to the field, load the planter, and go, and it limits the amount of additional inputs that you need to have in different systems on that planter to go in furrow. But certainly there are in furrow applications that for crop protection types of uses, but I think that's probably some of the pros and the cons there.
As you look at the latest research regarding roots and soil health and seed treatment, what is the yield potential that farmers can unlock? Are we talking 2 to 3 or 5 bushels per acre, or something more significant at 10 bushels per acre? And so, Amy, I'd like to start with you there.
I think it's hard to put a number on the potential because it depends on so many environmental factors, which we really can't predict. I mean, we know, I think Dale said a minute ago, the maximum yield potential is already in the bag of seed that the grower purchases. But then we have to think about how the environment is going to interact with the genetics. So we have, weather conditions, soil stresses like drought. We've got pests and diseases. And certainly seed treatments help a plant reach its full potential, and they're able to support the plant and help it to overcome challenges. But for me, it's hard to put a number on that.
Julie, if I could join Amy in remarking about that, I would very much agree with what Amy just said. I think some other things to think about would be that, is it a primary fruiting type of plant like corn that has one particular fruiting position, one ear? And if you lose that plant, does it have more of a direct impact? Or if you lose 20% of the stand in corn versus 20% of the stand in, say, cotton or soybeans, they're multi-fruiting positions. It's really hard to figure how much yield or what the value, the dollar value can be. But you can kind of think about if you lose plants due to a disease or insect feeding, you can kind of think about it in those terms, I think.
Great. Thanks, Dale. Steve, would you have anything to add?
Well, again, I just go back to obviously protection and going. Each segment of the business, whether it's even from the biologicals and that, we've seen anywhere from a couple bushels, depending on the crop, upwards, like you said, of 8 and 10 bushels. It depends on the pest pressures and everything, but really it's just really unleashing the total potential that's already in the bag, and that's what we're trying to get off to at the beginning.
And when we know that there continue to be more and more investments in seed treatments, and biologicals are becoming more and more important. What do we know about seed treatments today that maybe we didn't know 5 years ago? Dale, I'll let you lead off with that one.
Sure. Well, and my two colleagues here would probably reinforce this in maybe the same way or different ways, but certainly there's new discoveries of different classes of chemistries. When you think about hard chemistry, things like the SDHI class of chemistry that, say, Vibrance fungicide falls into, that's been a relatively recent discovery here in the last 4 to 5 years. It's been broadly adopted. Almost all commercial wide-scale soybean seed treatments have an SDHI class of chemistry. I know BASF, Bayer, as well as Syngenta all have strong SDHI products. That would be an example of what's happened recently that has really opened up a new level of protection against, say, like Rhizoctonia as well as Fusarium.
Steve or Amy, anything to add there?
This is Steve. I would like to add, I think something, and I don't know if 5 years is the perfect cutoff, but I know one thing that we've learned over the last several years is again, going back to some of the biological components and how they interact with the active ingredient chemical products on the seed and around the seed, how they become, how they perform, better in tandem with the chemical AIs, and where the strengths are at. And I think there's a deeper look at the abilities of those types of combinations to give better protection, not only at the time of planting, but then longer throughout the summertime as the crops develop, from just what the chemical structure and chemical product will do. So I think that's something that's an area that's being researched heavily, trying to expand into that area. So.
I was just going to add on to that and say that, there's so much excitement around biological seed treatments, and I think that from a physiological point of view, there are still a lot of open questions about what the microbial partners are actually doing, how they're interacting with the plant. I think that there's still much that we can learn, and much that we have learned in the last several years about how those microbes are acting on the plant's physiology. And then just as a second part, I'd say I think that when it comes to roots, the tools we have to study roots are getting better. So like below ground imaging, for instance, allows us to use MRI or CAT scan kind of technology to image roots in situ without having to dig them up. And I think that those kinds of tools are going to be really important in moving the study of seed treatments forward.
One additional thought that I thought, Julie, along these lines in the last 5 years or so has been the introduction or the large-scale adoption of seed-applied nematicides. We've known that nematodes are teeming in our soils. They're attacking roots. They're reducing yield potential, especially under stressful conditions. And we've also learned in the last 5 years that our genetic resistance to soybean cyst nematode is declining significantly, and we need additional tools to combat nematodes, especially soybean cyst nematode, the #1 pest of soybeans. So that's certainly something that's really come to the forefront in the last 4 to 5 years. Is I think all my colleagues, companies, as well as certainly Syngenta, have nematicides or are doing research on nematicides, seed-applied nematicides specifically. But that is certainly an area that we're realizing as we unlock root health and we try to understand how to keep our roots healthier and support more yield potential to feed the world, that protecting those roots really includes using a good nematicide to protect early on.
Great. Thank you. And I've got several questions that have come in here, so we'll move into our Q&A session with the audience. And the first question that was submitted was, what is the, and this is for Amy and Steve, what is the shelf life of the seed treatment products that you guys are offering? If you can kind of sum that up, I guess. Steve, you want to start?
Sure, thank you. From a biological perspective, if you look at the rhizobia products from BASF, we offer a 1-year shelf life on the rhizobia, and it's more a function of storage and temperature and that we need to make sure and want to protect that the grower gets the best product he has available every year. We do offer some of the other biologicals, like the integral goes into some products, and because it's a spore, it's a little more hardy, so that is the shelf life can be upwards of 2 years in container and such. So if you look at it from an on-seed perspective, like I said, the rhizobia combination with the integral on a soybean product is like 120 days after application. Some of the others on some other crops are again upwards of two years.
Thank you, Steve. Amy?
Yeah, I think biological products certainly are going to be a little bit more sensitive to temperature, storage conditions, and about a year on those, depending on what type they are, and then the chemicals certainly would be a little bit more stable.
And Dale, what crops is Vibrant labeled for?
It's difficult for me to quantify that. It is extremely popular across many crops. If there are specific questions on specific crops, I can certainly get answers for that. I work in corn and soy, and it's certainly labeled there. It's labeled in wheat. It's labeled in many other crops. So I hesitate to just try to go down a list here, but if there are specifics, I think our contact information may be available for questions. Be happy to follow up with anybody specifically on a specific crop.
And the next question that came in is also for you, and that I think was asking about the Rhizotron. So what is the tool that you're using to visualize plants or to help showcase the roots?
Yeah, basically it's just a shallow box, if you will, that would be about, I'd say just approximately say about 2 to 3 inches thick. It's got a metal back and metal sides, and then it has a clear plexiglass front that you saw. You basically just plant your seeds into the top of that. You can put most any type of pest you want in that soil, whether it's Rhizoctonia, like I showed there in the presentation here, Pythium. It just depends on what you're particularly looking for, or maybe a combination, and then just tend it under those conditions that particular pest really likes. Cool, wet conditions for Pythium, drier, warmer for Rhizoc, for instance, and then just tend the plant, keep the front covered so that the root system develops properly without light. And then when you reveal that, it's quite interesting. It's we found it very useful, and we use them extensively at major meetings and gatherings to illustrate differences between seed treatments and the value of ours.
Thank you. And the next question here is, what are the pros and cons for in-furrow application versus the seed treatment?
This is Steve. I think when we look at that from a pro and a con, I think really the in-furrow treatments that like BASF offers are not a replacement for the seed treatments, such on a cornfield. For instance, we have a Xanthion product that has pyraclostrobin and integral. It's called Xanthion. It's for in-furrow. I think it's a cumulative effect. It's a synergistic effect with the seed treatment. It's not meant to replace the seed treatment. So I think Dale touched on some of the application things you would have to do to put on an in-furrow treatment versus having your seed come seed treated. But I would not look at those as versus each other. I'd look at more of some complementary aspects.
There's different loading also. I mean, you can put a lot more active ingredient, grams of active in a furrow. So if you want longer control or greater protection, sometimes these actives may not be safe directly on the seed, but they're safer in the furrow, especially at the rate they're planning to use. So those are some other things just to kind of reinforce what Steve just said.
That's actually what our next webinar topic will be taking a look at. So I guess I can say stay tuned for more information to come from Seed World there. What percent of the overall seed treatment formulations are AI chemistries?
And I can comment on Pancho Votivo. The chemical AI is about 40%.
Okay. Thanks, Amy. Anybody else? Okay. What is the typical value or percent of yield contribution from seed treatment versus other nutrient investments? I think we kind of tried to tackle that in our roundtable. And as I understood it, it greatly varied depending on the pest pressures and what was happening that season.
Yeah, that one's very much like
Anybody have
earlier. No, that's very much like the earlier question. It's hard to put a number.
Can integral colonize on other crops, or is it specific to soybeans?
No, it is not specific to a legume crop or soybeans. It does work on other grass crops and such as well.
This question is for Dale. Is slow growth always a yield limiting factor? And what about potential induced systemic resistance caused by treatment?
Yeah, so I guess just speaking generally, that was where that comment was from, and coming from as a plant physiologist, and that would just be that anytime you're putting something, a stress on that plant, like a phytotoxic type of an interaction, something that slows down growth both above and below ground. After all, what you see above ground is often a reflection of what's going on under the ground, right? Or it can be. So anytime you're slowing that growth, we generally think of it as a negative, at least I do as a agronomist and plant physiologist. So I don't like to see that. Certainly there are products that help stimulate the plant's own innate defenses, and I'm all for that also. But when you keep the crop from emerging rapidly and growing off in a uniform, robust way, there is a fair tendency to reduce potential yield potential. Had you not applied that treatment, it does grow off better. So that's where that comment came from.
Thank you, Dale. That wraps up our Q&A session. So I want to thank our speakers for taking the time to share their knowledge and expertise with us. So thank you again, Steve, Amy, and Dale. And a thank you to our sponsors for making this webinar possible, BASF, Bayer, and Syngenta. I'd also like to thank my team behind the scenes that have worked on all of the other pieces that have brought our webinar together. This recording will be made available on our website within 48 hours, seedworld.com. And thank you for your time and attention this afternoon. And on behalf of everyone here, we hope you have a great rest of the day.